Property taxes are supposed to be the quiet part of homeownership, the line item you expect, the cost that stays in the background while you focus on the mortgage, the neighborhood, and the future value of the home. But in a growing number of U.S. cities, property taxes are no longer quiet. They are loud enough to change buying decisions, loud enough to force price cuts, loud enough to trap owners who want to move but cannot because their monthly payment is no longer competitive, and loud enough to push investors to sell when the rent math no longer works. In this video, we are counting down 10 U.S. cities where property taxes are actively reshaping the housing market, not as a theory, but as a real force that shows up in listings, in buyer behavior, in escrow payments, and in the number of people who decide they would rather rent, relocate, or downsize than keep absorbing annual increases. This is not about politics, it is about basic affordability. When the tax bill grows faster than wages, the market eventually responds. It responds with slower sales. It responds with higher inventory. It responds with concessions. And in the hardest-hit places, it responds with a kind of slow housing market damage that looks like stagnation on the surface, but feels like financial pressure in everyday life. If you want more housing market breakdowns that focus on the real monthly costs, subscribe to Discover the Nation. Number 10. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit is a city where property taxes can become devastating because of one simple dynamic. When home values are relatively low compared to other major metros, the tax rate has to do more work to fund services. That can create an unusually high effective tax burden on a typical household, especially on long-time homeowners and first-time buyers trying to stabilize their finances. In Detroit, the housing market is not just about the sale price, it is about what the buyer will owe every month after escrow and how confident they feel that bill will stay manageable. When property taxes rise alongside assessments, the monthly payment can jump in a way that feels like a surprise, even when the mortgage rate did not change. That is the kind of shock that turns a potential buyer into a renter and turns a hopeful owner into a seller. Detroit also has a second issue that makes taxes hit harder. Many neighborhoods are still dealing with vacancy, aging infrastructure, and uneven service outcomes. When residents feel they're paying a lot and not seeing improvements, you get a psychological break. Buyers become more skeptical, investors demand higher returns to compensate, and sellers realize they cannot price the home like a fast-growing market when the yearly tax bill is eating the affordability. What does this do to prices? It does not always cause a dramatic crash, it causes a ceiling. Homes that should be affordable become hard to sell at the price sellers want because the monthly payment is not just principal and interest, it is principal, interest, insurance, and a tax bill that can be large relative to the home value. That combination narrows the buyer pool. Watch for these signals in Detroit. More listings that mention tax appeals. More sellers offering credits to offset escrow. More investors focusing on cash buyers only because financing plus taxes makes margins too tight. And more homes that sit longer, even when the listing price looks reasonable compared to other cities. In Detroit, property taxes damage the market by turning lower sale prices into higher monthly payments than buyers expect, and that breaks the promise that a cheaper house automatically means an easier life. Number 9. Newark, New Jersey. Newark is not just dealing with high housing costs in the broader region, it is dealing with one of the biggest affordability squeezes in America because property taxes in parts of New Jersey can become a major share of household income. Here's what makes Newark unique. Buyers often come in looking for a more affordable alternative to Manhattan in parts of North Jersey that have become priced out for many households. They see the purchase price and feel relief. Then they see the tax bill and the relief disappears. This changes the market in a very specific way. It pushes buyers toward smaller homes, toward condos, or toward homes that look cheaper but may have hidden maintenance problems. It also creates a constant pressure on rent levels because landlords pass taxes through. When taxes rise, rents try to rise. When rents hit resistance, investors sell. That is how taxes can shape both the ownership and rental markets at the same time. Newark also has an important development tension. When a city is trying to grow its tax base through new development, it often leans on large projects, apartment construction, and redevelopment zones. But if the tax structure feels unpredictable, or if assessments reset sharply, developers and buyers price in more risk. That can slow momentum, and when momentum slows, price growth slows. Then the city tries to protect revenue, and the cycle tightens again. For homeowners, the most damaging moment is the escrow recalculation. A buyer may close with a payment that feels barely manageable, then the tax bill adjusts and the payment jumps. That is not a small inconvenience. That can be the difference between stability and financial stress. When enough households experience that stress, demand weakens and sellers have to compete harder. In Newark, watch for rising inventory in the same property types that were hot during the boom. Watch for price cuts that happen after several weeks, not immediately. And watch for buyers negotiating more aggressively on credits because they are trying to cushion future tax increases. Property taxes damage the Newark market because they erase the price advantage that draws buyers in, and they add uncertainty that makes households cautious. Number 8. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee is a strong example of how property taxes can squeeze a housing market even when home prices are not the highest in the country. The pressure comes from how large the tax bill feels relative to the value of the home and the income of the typical buyer. When that tax line item is heavy, it stops being background noise and starts controlling the deal. This matters because many buyers shop Milwaukee expecting the lower purchase price to make ownership easier. Then, escrow changes the story. Principal and interest might look manageable, but taxes lift the payment closer to what buyers would pay in much pricier metros. That narrows the buyer pool and pushes demand toward smaller homes, toward units with lower total monthly costs, or toward nearby municipalities where the tax burden feels more predictable. Milwaukee also shows how tax pressure creates a timing trap for homeowners. If assessments rise or levies rise, payments can reset upward even when the owner did nothing. That fear changes buyer behavior. People stop stretching, they start negotiating harder, they start walking away faster, even after a showing they loved. The damage shows up in real market behavior. Listings sit longer because buyers are comparing monthly payments, not list prices. Sellers offer closing cost credits to soften escrow. Investors get cautious because taxes eat cash flow, especially when rents stop rising fast enough to cover higher carrying costs. The city can still attract buyers, but the tax burden forces everyone to demand a better deal. Watch for 3 signals in Milwaukee. More listings emphasizing low taxes as a major selling point, more buyers asking for credits tied directly to escrow, and more households choosing nearby alternatives even if they prefer the city, simply because the monthly payment feels safer elsewhere. Number 7. Aurora, Illinois. Aurora sits in a state where property taxes are a constant headline, and that matters because Illinois buyers have learned a hard lesson. Even if the purchase price looks attractive compared to coastal markets, the long-term cost of ownership can climb faster than expected. Aurora is a city where many households are seeking stability. It is family-oriented. It is commuter-oriented. It has a large share of buyers who are not chasing luxury. They are chasing predictability. That is why property taxes hit so hard here. When taxes rise, it feels like the one promise of suburban ownership is being broken. In Illinois, the burden often connects to school funding, local government obligations, and long-standing pension costs. The buyer does not need to understand every policy detail to feel the outcome. The outcome is a bill that rises, sometimes while home values are not rising at the same pace. That is where the housing market damage begins. When taxes rise faster than values, you get an unusual effect. Owners feel punished for staying, buyers feel punished for buying, and sellers realize that the buyer pool is shrinking because each year the monthly payment is less competitive relative to renting or moving to a different county. Aurora also has a competition problem. It competes with other suburbs for the same buyer. When multiple areas offer similar homes, similar schools, and similar commute patterns, buyers compare tax bills directly. In that environment, the city with the heavier burden has to adjust through price. This is how a market slowly bends downward. It is not always a collapse, it is a repricing. A home that would have sold quickly at a certain level now needs concessions, or it needs a lower price to offset the tax burden. That becomes the new normal. Watch for these signals in Aurora: rising numbers of tax appeal conversations among homeowners, more listings where sellers highlight recent tax outcomes, and a stronger tilt toward first-time buyers who are buying only if they can keep the home at a lower price point. That leads to softness in the mid-tier inventory. Aurora is a city where property taxes damage the market by undermining predictability, and predictability is what suburban buyers value most. Number 6. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago is one of the clearest examples of how property taxes can reshape an entire urban housing market because the pressure shows up in almost every segment: single-family homes, condos, two-flats, investor properties, and it shows up differently in each. Chicago buyers face a layered cost structure. Property taxes can rise with assessments. Condo owners face taxes plus HOA fees that can increase as building costs rise. Landlords face taxes that have to be covered by rent, but rents have a ceiling. When you stack all of that together, the market starts to behave differently. In Chicago, property taxes also influence where demand goes. If taxes rise faster in one neighborhood than another, buyers do not just accept it, they shift. That creates uneven housing outcomes. Some pockets remain stable, others see more inventory, others see stronger price cuts, and that unevenness makes the city feel like multiple markets at once. Chicago also has a long-running issue that makes taxes emotionally intense. People tie the tax bill to quality of services. When residents believe they are paying more without seeing improvements in safety, schools, and infrastructure, it becomes a reason to exit. That exit pressure matters. If more households decide to leave the city for nearby suburbs or other states, demand softens and prices adjust. The biggest damage mechanism in Chicago is monthly payment shock. When taxes rise, escrow rises, and the payment becomes less competitive. The buyer who could afford the home at closing may not feel comfortable 6 months later. That fear reduces bidding intensity. Less bidding intensity means fewer multiple offers. Fewer multiple offers means prices stop rising. When prices stop rising while costs rise, you get a market that feels stuck. Watch for listings that sit longer, even in decent neighborhoods. Watch for buyers negotiating hard on credits, especially for condos with high HOA costs. Watch for investor pullback in areas where taxes make the rent math too thin. And watch for higher-end properties taking longer to sell, because buyers at that level are comparing Chicago against other metros where the full monthly burden is lower. Chicago is not being destroyed by one factor. It is being squeezed by a cost structure that makes ownership feel less rewarding over time. Number 5. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore is one of the most direct examples in the country of how a high property tax rate can distort housing market. When the tax rate is significantly higher than nearby jurisdictions, it becomes a relocation incentive by itself. Buyers do not need a spreadsheet to understand that. They just compare monthly payments and decide. This creates a serious market challenge. Baltimore has homes that can look affordable at the sale price. That should attract buyers. But when the property tax bill is high enough, the monthly payment can look similar to a more expensive home outside the city. That undermines the value proposition. Baltimore also has a second issue that makes taxes more destructive. Vacancy in uneven neighborhood conditions create hesitation. Buyers want confidence that the city is improving. When they see a high tax burden alongside visible signs of struggle, they assume future costs could rise further. That assumption reduces demand. This is how taxes can trap homeowners. A resident may want to sell, but the buyer pool is thinner because buyers know the tax burden, so the seller must cut price to compensate. But cutting price may not be enough if the buyer is still focused on the monthly payment. That creates stagnation and sometimes forced discounting. For investors, the story is brutal. If property taxes rise and rents cannot rise at the same pace, margins collapse. When margins collapse, investors sell. When investors sell, inventory rises. And when inventory rises in a city already dealing with demand concerns, prices soften further. Watch for Baltimore listings that emphasize incentives, abatements, or special programs because that signals the market is trying to offset taxes through policy tools. Watch for buyers choosing nearby counties even when they want to live in the city. And watch for a growing mismatch between the number of homes listed and the number of qualified, willing buyers. Baltimore shows that when property taxes are far above regional norms, they do not just reduce affordability, they become a structural barrier to market recovery. Number 4. Portland, Oregon. Portland is a city where property taxes can harm the housing market in a way that surprises people, because many assume the biggest housing cost issue is just the sale price. But taxes and local levies can accumulate, and when households already feel pressure from broader living costs, taxes become the tipping point. Portland also has a dynamic that matters in many West Coast cities. Buyers are sensitive to total monthly cost, and they're sensitive to whether that cost feels worth it. When households perceive a gap between taxes paid and quality of services, it reduces willingness to buy at the current price. Portland has also seen major changes in migration patterns over recent years. When a city loses households or sees slower inflow, the housing market loses some demand. If demand slows while public costs remain high, governments still need revenue. The burden can shift onto remaining owners. That is when taxes become more painful. In practical housing market terms, Portland tax pressure shows up as buyer pickiness. Buyers demand condition. They demand location advantages. They demand proof that a property will hold value. Homes that would have sold quickly in a hot market can sit longer if the buyer is thinking about the total cost stack. Portland also has a strong investor and landlord component in certain neighborhoods. When taxes and costs rise while rents flatten, landlords cut back on buying. Some sell. That adds supply. Watch for longer days on market. Watch for sellers offering concessions earlier. Watch for buyers moving outward to suburbs where the tax structure feels more predictable. And watch for higher-priced homes seeing the biggest slowdown, because buyers at that level have the most flexibility to choose a different metro entirely. In Portland, taxes damage the market through affordability, but also through confidence. When confidence drops, buyers stop stretching and prices stop holding. Number 3. Austin, Texas. Austin is a city where many buyers used to accept high costs because the growth story felt unstoppable. But property taxes in Texas work differently than many newcomers expect. There is no state income tax, but property taxes can be heavy, and appraisal increases can push payments higher quickly. In Austin, the damage comes from speed. When home values rise fast, assessments often follow. That can create a tax bill that jumps even if the owner did nothing. For a household that already stretched to buy, that jump can be the difference between comfort and stress. It also changes what buyers feel safe paying, because they are not just budgeting for today, they're budgeting for the next reassessment too. Austin also has a new build and suburb expansion layer. When the market cools, builders offer incentives. That reduces effective monthly payments for new buyers, while existing owners are still carrying higher taxes based on past valuations. That creates an unfair feeling, and it makes resale homes less competitive. Austin also has a renter and investor element. If taxes and insurance costs rise, landlords must charge more, but rent growth cannot climb forever. When rent growth stalls, investors pause. When investors pause, demand falls. When demand falls, prices soften. That is how taxes can contribute to a broader slowdown. Watch for more homeowners talking about tax protests and appraisal appeals. Watch for buyers shifting to smaller homes or areas farther out because the monthly payment in the core has become too high. And watch for more listings from owners who bought recently and now feel trapped by the full monthly cost. Austin shows that even in a high-demand city, property taxes can be the force that breaks the stretch buyer, and when enough stretch buyers disappear, the market reprices. Number 2. Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland is a city where property taxes can damage the housing market in a way that feels especially unfair because the purchase prices often look like a bargain at first glance. Buyers come in thinking the lower home price means a lighter monthly payment. Then escrow runs the real numbers, and the tax bill changes the entire affordability picture. Cleveland sits in a county where property tax pressure has been a major stress point, and it has become more visible as reassessments and higher bills hit homeowners. When assessments reset higher, the buyer does not just worry about the mortgage, the buyer worries about what happens next year when the tax bill updates again. That fear changes demand. People stop stretching, they offer less, they demand credits, and they walk away faster when the monthly payment looks unstable. The damage also shows up in household behavior, not just market stats. When taxes rise faster than wages, more owners fall behind and delinquencies increase. That creates a second layer of market pressure because it adds forced sales, vacant homes, and more listings that need work. In a market that already depends on payment-sensitive buyers, even a small shift in taxes can knock out a large slice of demand. Cleveland also has a regional comparison problem. Buyers can move a short distance and land in a different tax situation, a different school district structure, and a different monthly payments. When buyers can lower their tax exposure by choosing a nearby area, the city has to compete through price. That is how taxes quietly cap the market, not with one dramatic crash, but with slower sales, more reductions, and a growing gap between what sellers want and what buyers will pay. Watch for 3 signals in Cleveland. More listings that highlight taxes as a selling point, because that means buyers are filtering for it. More buyers asking for credits tied to escrow, not repairs, and more homes sitting longer even when the list price looks reasonable, because the decision is being made on monthly cost, not sticker price. Number 1. Providence, Rhode Island. Providence is a city where property taxes can become the deciding factor that freezes the market, because the tax bill hits buyers at the exact moment they are already stretched by higher monthly payments. Many people look at Providence expecting a more affordable alternative to bigger Northeast metros. The purchase price can look reasonable. Then the full monthly cost shows up in escrow, and the tax side of the payment changes the entire affordability picture. What makes Providence stand out is how quickly taxes can erase the value advantage that draws buyers in. When a household is comparing Providence to nearby towns and nearby states, the comparison is not just the listing price, it is the monthly total: mortgage, insurance, utilities, and the property tax bill. Once that tax bill becomes large enough, buyers do one of 3 things. They buy smaller than planned, they demand a discount, or they stop and rent longer. Providence also has a housing stock reality that makes taxes feel heavier. Many homes are older and require ongoing maintenance. Buyers are not just budgeting for the payment, they are budgeting for repairs, heating costs, and upkeep. When taxes are high on top of that, the buyer becomes more selective and less willing to stretch. That pushes sellers into reductions, especially for homes that do not feel updated or move-in ready. For investors, the tax pressure changes the rent math. If taxes rise while rent growth slows, the margin gets thinner. Some investors stop buying, some sell. When investor demand weakens, the market loses one of its extra sources of competition, and inventory takes longer to clear. Watch for the signals that taxes are driving the slowdown. More listings highlighting low taxes as a feature. More buyers asking for credits tied to escrow instead of repairs. More price cuts that come after a home sits for weeks because sellers realize the tax burden is narrowing the buyer pool. Providence shows how a tax-heavy monthly payment can turn a workable housing market into one that feels stuck, even when people still want to live there. Property taxes destroy housing markets in different ways. In some places, they create monthly payment shock. In others, they erase the value advantage that draws buyers. In others, they break investor math and increase inventory. And in cities where residents feel the tax burden is not matched by results, taxes become a driver of migration, and migration changes everything. If you want a part 2 focused on a different set of cities or focused only on one state, subscribe to Discover the Nation.